One of the reasons humans have been such a successful species, let's make sure it's, yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Humans are quite particular about whom they choose to imitate. We imitate, and that's one of the reasons why we are so successful as a species, because we imitate people that are successful. If you're a basketball player, you're not going to imitate Charlie Smith that sits on the end of the bench and never plays, gets to play the last 20 seconds of the game so that they don't injure any of the players that they want to keep healthy. You're going to try to imitate Michael Jordan, or you're going to try to imitate LeBron James, or imitate Charles Barkley, or whatever, Larry Bird. You're not going to try to imitate somebody that's not successful. We as humans, we don't have a choice. We try to imitate someone that we see as successful. Humans are said to have prestige bias. So Michael Jordan, of course, is a much better basketball player or he was, than just about everybody else. So he had prestige. Therefore, we have this strange prestige bias. Once upon a time, there was they were asking Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley had done something. I can't remember what it was. Visited prostitutes, and I can't remember what the situation was. And they told him, you know, Charles, you're a I can't think of the word. You're an icon for children, and you need to be careful as to what you do. He says, I'm no icon. He didn't want to be an icon, but of course the reality is he has prestige, so people try to emulate him. They try to imitate him. They actually don't try to, well, maybe they do try to emulate him. Anyway, so we have prestige bias. We're not going to try to imitate the worst player on the team. We're going to try to imitate the best player on the team. They're especially concerned with detecting who has prestige, and we have this capability of doing this. If we look at the President of the United States and his cabinet, who are we going to emulate? Which one are we going to find iconic? And that's a good question with this group of individuals, I don't know. But we're looking for the person with the most prestige. When Obama was the President of the United States, there were a lot of people that really respected him and liked him a whole lot. Who else was in his cabinet? Who else did we notice? Who was the Vice President under Barack Obama? I'm sorry?
John McCain?
No, he's a Republican. Obama was a Democrat.
Who was it then?
It's Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. Yeah, it was Joe Biden.
And his wife got pretty famous too.
I'm sorry?
His wife, wasn't she getting famous too for trying to make a healthier America?
Right, yeah, sure. So we would imitate these prestigious individuals. I don't know about Joe, but certainly Michelle and Barack, possibly because we have this capability of just detecting who is more important. One person is more important than the other. That's why we seek others who have skills that are respected by others, and they try to imitate what these individuals are doing. We try to imitate them. Imitating prestigious others is a very efficient way of cultural learning. So we learn our culture from those select individuals. So if you were talking about, let's not get into that. I was going to say, if you're going to imitate somebody as far as Navajo knowledge is concerned at this institution, maybe you pick Avery, maybe you pick Wilson, because they are both holy men, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Individuals are more likely to learn successfully if they target those people who are especially talented, and that's what we do. Like I said, you're not going to imitate the guy that's sitting on the bench. You're going to try to imitate Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, or Charles Barkley, or LeBron James, or Durant, or what's the guy that had a triple-double for every game he played this year? Michael Westbrook. Michael Westbrook. Who's ever heard of Michael Westbrook? Well, he didn't win the NBA championship, so nobody really knows him. But he had a triple-double in every game he played, including games against the Warriors and against the Cavaliers. And I don't know who he plays for. I can't remember who he plays for. Identifying signs of prestige and then imitating people who display those signs are skills that we are likely selected for in the course of human evolution. So this is evolutionary, and that's the reason we do it. We see people with prestige. Now, if you think about it, maybe this is why we have people that are of royal lineage. We accept these individuals. We accept them because we need somebody to emulate. And this is natural for us, to look at these individuals and say they are superior to everybody else, if you think about it. And this isn't the way that it works just in Europe. This is the way it works all around the world. Indonesia has a royal family. There are African countries with royal families. So this is something that we see all over the place. Do we have a royal family in the United States? Are the Bushes a royal family? Are the Kennedys a royal family in the United States? Are these individuals that we have to emulate, or that we feel like we have to emulate? Some people do, of course they do. So if you're a relatively conservative individual, potentially the Bushes are very important to you. It looked like Jeb might be number 3 Bush president. It was a possibility. I don't think there's any other Bushes out there that might be that. But the Kennedys, my goodness, look at the Kennedys. We had John that was a president. We had Bobby that looked like he was going to win the Democratic primary in 1968 before he was assassinated. Almost all there are a number of Kennedy children. Not John's child, of course, he died in a plane crash. But Bobby's kids. Ted Kennedy was an important senator. So we have, these are people that we emulate. These are people that we imitate, potentially. And this is evolutionary. This has an aspect of evolution. And maybe that's why we accept people to be in charge of us. Because this is part of our evolution. To look at somebody and say they are better than we are. To accept somebody is better than we are. And of course the royal family is something completely different.
So are you saying that we're always looking for a leader?
We are. We're always looking for somebody to follow. Sure. We're always looking for somebody to follow. Right? You go into the DMV, what do? Well, you get behind the last guy in the line because, well, that's what you feel like that's what you're supposed to do. You don't just stand there and go, give me my driver's license. That ain't gonna work. You're trying to figure out how the organization works. And of course, we're always looking for somebody that has the information that we don't have.
And that's like a basic human trait? Or?
It is. It seems to be an evolutionary trait. Now, normally, why do I have more information than you guys do? Because I looked at the book first. I'm older than you are. That gives me knowledge that you don't have.
You have don't you have your master's and your doctorate?
No, my doctorate. It was painful getting my doctorate. I have a doctorate, so we've created this hierarchy in education, in academia, that allows you to know who has the knowledge. And this is evolutionary. So you're willing to sit there and be relatively quiet and listen to what I have to say and write down some of the stuff that I do say. Not Jeff. He does have a pen, just in case. I may say something important, which probably won't happen. Our ancestors who did this were more likely to acquire the highly useful cultural knowledge that gave them the survival advantage compared with those who did not. So the ones that followed, the wise people, are the ones that survived. They were the ones that were able to survive. Now it's kind of interesting if you look at the Grobant tribe. The Grobants were separated into 2 groups. And sometimes they followed one leader, and sometimes they followed the other leader. It all depended, and you could follow whichever group you wanted to. You might have more relatives in this group, so you might be more supported in this group, so they would follow that leader. Now, normally they traveled kind of together when they were hunting buffalo or whatever. They traveled together, but very often they would kind of split off, go around the mountain the other way. Is this the easier way to go? Well, let's follow Charlie. You know, that kind of thing. Really fascinating stuff. So which groups survived? Well, both of them were able to survive. Sometimes it was one guy, sometimes it was the other guy that was in charge. And actually what they were following the leader with the pipes. They had two holy pipes. One of them was a feather pipe and the other is a flat pipe. And so one leader had the flat pipe and the other leader had the feather pipe, and they, of course, they followed one or the other of them. Humans have what is known as theory of mind. So we understand people. I can look at you and see what you're thinking. I think I know what you're thinking. Theory of mind. I know that you have your own thoughts. You don't have to have my thoughts. You can have your own thoughts. The theory of mind means that people understand others and have minds that are different from their own, and thus that other people have perspectives and intentions that are different from their own. And this is kind of a problem that we've had in the United States, because individuals want everybody to think like they do. If you think about Charlottesville was a group of people that are white supremacists. They are neo-Nazis. They're members of the Ku Klux Klan. These are individuals that want everybody to recognize the fact that they're superior to everybody else. But of course, there are a lot of people in the United States that don't feel that way. As a matter of fact, almost everybody in the United States doesn't feel that way. But the reality is, the other side wants them to get rid of those ideas. But we understand what they're thinking. We would rather that they didn't promote hate. Because unfortunately, when somebody is superior, that makes other individuals inferior, and that creates an attitude of hate, as it were. And you get the joke. I was thinking of pie. Imitative learning is where the learner copies precisely what they think that the model is trying to do. Imitating. So if I imitate Michael Jordan, I'm trying to play basketball like Michael Jordan plays. I'm imitating him. Emulative learning is where the learner is focused on the environment events that are involved. Emulative learner is only focused on the events that happen around the model and not the model what the model intends to accomplish. Emulative. In emulative learning, you learn one task but can't use that knowledge in any other context. So if you emulate somebody, imitating means you can do it just like they do it, and you can use that same skill in other contexts. But if you emulate somebody, it's just you're a one-trick pony. You can only do that one thing, and you can only do it in this context. Now this becomes very important. Remember, I was mixing up the terms imitate and emulate. You want to emulate this leader. Well, the only time you're going to really emulate that leader, you may have a lot of respect for that leader, but the only time you're going to emulate that leader is when you're in charge, when you're a leader yourself. So you have ideas, you're trying to take in his information, but the reality is it's still a one-trick situation. That's the only time that you will do that. So there are individuals that, back in the 1980s, and none of you were alive in the 1980s, but if you had been alive in the 1980s, there were a lot of people that were dressing like Madonna. There were a lot of people that were dressing like, what was that lady from England? There was a lady from England, and she wore really interesting clothes. And, I can't think of her. Pat Benatar. There were a lot of people that dressed like Madonna. Madonna, for some reason, put her underwear on the outside of her clothes. Who knows why? We're not exactly sure. I don't have any idea. So women started emulating her. They started dressing like Madonna. They emulated her. Did they also do all the other things that Madonna was doing? Dating, I don't know who she dated. She's dating Warren Beatty for a while. She made a movie about it, and there was all kinds of interesting and strange sexual things in that movie. So anyway, I'm going to trip on this stuff.
What movie was that?
I'm sorry?
What movie was that?
I never saw it. But a book came out. She printed a book, and there's all kinds of... And you would probably think of it as pornographic. I do to some extent, because there was sex acts being performed in the book, as confusing as that is. Most of it was her eating, drinking a beer or eating eggs or something. But then, of course, they would have other stuff in there. Anyway. Okay, so we're talking about emulate and imitate. If you imitate something, then you take the skills of this select individual and you try to use them in the rest of your life. If you emulate, it's just the one thing you're accepting. Human cultural learning is cumulative, of course. So just as you're learning about the Dene culture from Wilson and Avery, you're accumulating that information, this cultural information. And maybe you're making it part of your life. You're imitating it. You're imitating it because you can use it in other contexts. But if you just emulated it, then you would only be able to use it here at this college. You wouldn't use it anyplace else in your life, potentially. Okay. Whoops. Cultural information grows in complexity and often in utility over time. This is called the Ratchet Effect. Like a ratchet, it always moves forward. It is not allowed to slip backward. As you can see, there's no way that this ratchet is ever going to go the other direction. It will tie it up. It will not be able to move. It can only move in one direction. And that's known as a ratchet effect. Cultural information can continue to accumulate without losing the earlier information. So all the information you have from when you were 5 years old, all the information you have when you started school and learned all of whatever you learned. How many schools did you go to, Joe?
3.
3. Yeah, and it was different in every school. The culture was different. Were you in different parts of the world?
Arizona and Colorado, and then I was in the Director 5 with Norco, so it's actually 2 sites.
Yeah. So it was different. It was different. So you accumulated all this information about your grade school, your high school, your junior high, and your high school. I only went to one school, so there you go. And I have and don't forget, we don't have class on the 6th. The 7th, I'm sorry, the 7th. We don't have class on the 7th because I have to run down to Albuquerque and jump on a plane. Cultural information can continue to accumulate without losing the earlier information. That's what we were just talking about. Okay. Which is kind of interesting and important because you do have all that information from Colorado. Do they treat American Indians differently in Colorado than they do in Arizona?
I don't know, 'cause I went to Fort Lewis, so I kind of...
Oh, so that was really
Yeah.
close to here. Okay, that's not that far away. Okay, that's not too bad.
I would kind of say they do. I think they look at all Native Americans as drugs, in Colorado, and druggies and stuff, because when you go there, it's like, you look at them and you're like, never mind.
Yeah. We're just people like everybody else.
Well, actually, I was mistaken for Hispanic, which is weird because I was taking Spanish classes. I still was Hispanic.
So you hablas español? Un poquito, yeah. That's about as much as I learned in my high school Spanish too. To have a cumulative cultural evolution, you need creative invention and reliable and faithful social transmission. So you need to be creative, and things change over time. And this is one of the questions I asked last time. Is it possible that your culture has changed because of the impact of the Western world? Is it possible that it's changed over the last 50 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it probably has. So some of the things that you're being taught right now, if this college actually existed in 1920, they would be teaching you different things because the traditions have changed over time. And that has to do with creative invention. How do we do that?
With our tribe, our language was completely almost wiped out. So we had to bring Canada down to help us learn our language. So we were the first Native American tribe to put immersion schools on our reservation, and so we had that, but the Grovon, they came to our tribe and they told us, because we were having a Sundance, and they told us, they said, everything you guys are doing right now is wrong in that Sundance. He said, this medicine man said, we can see a snake around the middle pole, it's all around, it's this bad. So, we try to copy our culture, but we don't.
You lost it.
Yeah, we lost it.
Well, one of the real positive things, I guess, about the Grove On, I told you the priest came from Washington D.C. and wrote a book, 2 volumes, and actually I have them at home. Michelle's dad found them for me, and so it gives you the information of what was going on in the 1880s. So, and that's probably one of the sources that they used to tell you that this was incorrect. I'm guessing. It's just a guess. There are sun dances. I think there's 3 on the Fort Belknap Reservation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
There's one at Hayes, there's one in Lodgepole, and then there's the Talks Difference have a sun dance over at Horse View. It's the first view. Anyway, Horse View, I think. And the interesting thing is that they let white people go to the one at Hayes and the one at Lodgepole, but the Talks Different one, white people can't attend at all because that would taint something. I've never figured that one out.
Well, see now, my people, the Blackfeet people, we invite every Bilagana or every Napiaki to our sun dances.
Right.
And it's almost shameful because my family, they're like that. They would rather teach somebody from Poland or Germany or wherever the tradition, but when it comes to our own people, we're like, no, stop
If
that.
you don't know it, then
Yeah,
yeah.
that's your problem.
then you're not as Blackfeet as I am. Well, it's the same way at Hayes and Lodgepole. The white people can go to those 2 sun dances, but not the one out at Horse View.
Who runs that one?
Talks
Gene?
Different.
Is it
Yeah.
Gene Talks Different? or-
You know, it's his brother. It's his older brother.
I've never been to that one.
Yeah, it's his older brother. Gene, the dancing machine. Gene's my friend. Gene is funny. He's so funny. The larger group of people, the better the cultural information can be maintained and improved upon. And if you think of small countries, how many inventions do the small countries have? How many inventions do the large countries have? As it turns out, the larger the country, the more likely that they are innovative and that they have changed things. You're more likely to encounter a successful model to copy from a larger group than from a smaller group. Think of it as basketball. If you go to a large high school with 1,000 students, what's the probability you're going to have a good basketball team? What if you come from a high school with 50 people? What's the probability you're going to have a good basketball team? Not very high. Okay. So it's the same way with change, with creativity. If you have 1 million people in a town or in a country, then you're more likely to have innovations than a country that has 100,000 people in it. 10 times more likely to have new innovations. There will be more innovations that come from a larger group than from a smaller group, so a larger group will be more likely to have at least one person stumble on a good idea. It's just like you're more likely to find a good basketball player out of 1,000 people than you are out of 50 people. It's just the way it works. Watched a movie last night, terrible movie, had Robin Williams and Kurt Russell in it. It was about football and a football game they played in 1972, and now they wanted to replay the football game. But the problem was that the town that they got their butts kicked by, Bakersfield, is a big city, and they were living in a small village called Taft. And Taft would always play Bakersfield and get their fannies pounded. It's called The Way We Were or something like that. It's a really dumb movie. Anyway, in the end, they beat the Bakersfield. Let's see, spoiler alert. It's a really bad movie. Looking at the Polynesians settling the South Pacific, the islands with the largest populations at the time of first contact had far more different kinds of tools than the islands with the smallest populations. Bigger populations allowed for more rapid spread of cultural innovations, and of course we can see all the islands. The Fiji Islands had a lot of people, Hawaii had a lot of people. So they were the places with more tools, they had more innovative tools and cultural aspects to them. However, sometimes the ratchet slips and the population will lose ideas. And this is something that we saw when we looked at the Aboriginal populations of Australia and of some of the smaller islands around Australia. Tasmania is one of them. It's a small island, as you can see. Well, it's not that small, but it's south of Australia. When Europeans initially arrived in Tasmania, they found scattered foraging bands of humans utilizing very simple technology. Archaeological digs have shown that the technology seen in their past was far more advanced than what was demonstrated in their current technology. They had lost it. It had ratcheted backwards. Their culture had changed. They had lost ideas. Comparing the Tasmanian Aborigines with those across the Bass Strait in Australia, the Tasmanians maintained a toolkit of only 24 items, whereas the Australians maintained a toolkit of hundreds of items. And they weren't that far apart, but they couldn't communicate with one another. Probably, and we know that what has happened was that Australians actually went to Tasmania. When they got down there, of course, because the population was relatively small, they didn't come up with any new tools, and they actually lost tools in time. By the time the Western man got down there were only 24 items in the Tasmanian toolkit. They had lost such items as bone tools, cold weather clothing, fish hooks, and boomerangs. They had lost all of that. They forgot how to do it. They forgot how to make it. It's kind of like the native languages. If you don't use it, you lose it. And that's exactly what happened with these guys. They lost the boomerang, they lost fish hooks, they lost bone tools, and they lost warm weather gear. And it does get cold on Tasmania, it's raining. But that's not the only place we've seen this happen. Other Melanesian islands, we've seen the same thing. The Torres Islands, which are north of Australia, they also lost tools, they also lost culture. The reclusive Suriano of Bolivia lost some culture and some tools as well. The reclusive Piraha of Brazil have lost tools. So if we look at the archaeological information that we have about these individuals, we can see that their tools used to be far more extensive than they are today. Now the problem is, of course, going in there and actually getting them to allow us to dig things up and find out what things used to look like. But of course, we have found these 4 groups of individuals have actually ratcheted in the other direction. So potentially, if the same thing happened in the United States, if we had a nuclear war and there were only patches of people around the United States that were left, if we came into that area 1,000 years later, they would not certainly have cell phones. They wouldn't have cars. They wouldn't have the same technologies that we have, potentially. Humans are a cultural species that exists within worlds consisting of cultural information that has accumulated over our history, just like you guys. And it's really easy when we're looking at your history. Because we know exactly what has happened. We know the history of the Dene people since Western man first arrived. We can look at what the Spanish have done and how they have changed the attitudes of this group of individuals. And we can look at the other Westerners that came in, the English and the French and everyone else. So we know that history, and we can see how things have changed over time. Cultural ideas greatly influence the ways that we live our lives, determining much of what we do on a daily basis. We are all born into rich cultural worlds. We are constantly learning and being influenced by the shared ideas that make up our cultures. And it's a constant thing. And if you're on Facebook or if you're on Twitter or whatever else there is out there, I don't know, MySpace, I don't know. So all of these things are giving you new information. They're telling you how to dress. They're telling you how to act. Fascinating stuff if you think about it. So my question is, how in the world is all this going to change things in the future? Are kids going to want to do anything traditional? Are they going to accept the culture off the internet, or are they going to accept the culture of their environment? I mean, that's part of their environment, actually. So you get an old fart like me, and I just got my first cell phone. I'm so excited. And I couldn't get it charged last night. Let me see if it's still working. Yeah, it's still working. I'm okay. I was worried that my wife tried to call me, and my phone was dead. I don't know what it would have told it. It's now out of service or something like that. But the question is, what's going to happen in the future?
We're gonna rely on internet.
If that's true, then we're going to all have the same culture. It's going to be an internet culture. So we're going to be, not only that, but it's going to change our spelling. LOL, we're going to start saying things like OMG and LOL and I don't know. WTF? You know.
I saw something online. It was saying 20 years ago we went to the internet to escape the real world, but now today we use the real world to escape the internet.
There you go. I believe that. I think that's true. Yeah, the internet is so intrusive. And it is, it's completely intrusive. Yeah.
It's weird too, like, I did a research on myself, and it showed all the places I lived in Missouri and Montana and Farmington, and I was like, I didn't know this,
Well, they've got all my addresses too. Punch myself up and find out where I've been. Find out my old telephone number. I don't remember any of my old telephone number. So we live in a world that is culturally rich, and it will always be culturally rich. And we get to decide what we are going to accept. Jeff, of course, obviously has accepted Harley Quinn as his iconic figure. Isn't that Harley Quinn?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But this is, I don't know, My Little Kitty rendition of Harley Quinn or something, I don't know.
Well, we just had that GameStop. That was really cool.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so is that an iconic figure for you, Harley Quinn? I've never seen that movie, so I'm not exactly sure.
A lot of girls dress like her from last year. Is it from that movie Suicide Squad?
Really?
That Harley Quinn, or is it a different Harley?
It's like the old
The one off of what's the crazy?
the Batman the animated series. That
Oh, I thought you were talking about Suicide Squad.
oh, no.
Suicide Squad, yeah. That's
Yeah,
the
it's
one
the
I
same
was
person.
thinking. Let's stop talking about. Let's talk about how smart we are. We have the biggest brains in the world. Well, we don't actually. We don't. Turns out we don't have the biggest brains in the world. And I'll tell you what animal has the biggest. Well, actually, the biggest brain animal in the world is a tiny little shrew. Has a bigger brain than we have. Our brain size is determined by the encephalization quotient, the ratio of brain weight of an animal to that predicted for a comparable animal of the same size. We are at 4.6, so we weigh what? Between 150 and 200 pounds. And if we're an animal of 150 to 200 pounds, our brains should be 4.6 times smaller than it actually is. But since we're so brilliant, of course, we have a ratio of 4.6. Only the tiny shrew has a larger brain. 10% of his body weight is taken up with brain weight. I know. How does he survive? How does he is like everybody's food, so how does he survive with his big brain, obviously? Our brains consume about 16% of our basal metabolism, even though our brains only represent 2% of our body weight. So we burn up a lot of calories with our brains, with our thinking. One of the things that you will see if you ever interact with a lot of individuals suffering from schizophrenia, since they have schizophrenia, their brains are whirring all the time. We're thinking of whatever we're thinking, but if you are schizophrenic, you can't control your thoughts. And since you can't control your thoughts, it's just going all over the place all the time. So it's kind of like driving a car and engaging the clutch. That's us, because we're going in a specific direction. But when he engages his clutch and he steps down on the gas, all that happens is the engine revs. That's all that happens. He's not going anywhere. And he just keeps revving higher and higher and higher, trying to get his car to go. And that's the way schizophrenia works. So he burns tons and tons of calories, far more than someone who isn't suffering from schizophrenia. And because of that, if you've ever been around schizophrenics, they tend to be really, really skinny. I'm sorry, slender. They tend to be slender. It's the word you're not supposed to use. Okay, they tend to be very slender because they're burning all those calories, a lot more calories than we are. They also forget to eat sometimes, but that's neither here nor there. And they move a lot. They walk a lot, and they walk really, really fast. Anyway, there's a ton of stuff going on with those individuals, and because of that, because of their consumption of calories by their brains, they tend to be relatively slender. And then, of course, you medicate them. So you slow their brains down. And once you do that, they just kind of balloon out. They just get really fat. And one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about people that who are suffering from schizophrenia is that on their medication they tend to be to have very poor muscle tone and to be relatively fat. But the reality is it's not the medication that makes them fat. It's the fact that their metabolism has decreased because of the medication that they're taking. The brain of the average mammal only consumes about 3% of their basal metabolism. The brain of a marsupial, like a possum, if you've ever been around a possum, they only consume about 1% of their basal metabolism. These are dumb animals. Almost the entire continent of Australia is covered with marsupials. Almost all of their mammals are marsupials. In order to maintain a massive human brain, the trade-off was shrinkage in other areas. We can't maintain muscle mass, we can't maintain digestive mass if we have such a large brain. So we had to trade off. And one of the ways that we traded off was through muscle mass. Chimpanzees' muscles are 27% larger than humans. Even a small chimpanzee is much stronger than a human. Even a tiny one. They're a lot stronger than we are. But actually what we lost more than anything else was our digestive system. The stomach and the small and large intestines and our guts are about 60% smaller than that of the chimpanzee. If you look at a chimpanzee, he's got a big abdomen. He's got a huge abdomen. Why? Because his digestive system is far more extensive than ours are. To the point, it's 60% larger than ours are. So how in the world do we ever maintain ourselves with such a tiny little gut? How can we survive? Well, the way we did it was we discovered how to digest food outside of our bodies. Chimpanzees have to digest food inside their guts, but we can digest food outside of our bodies. And we do this with cooked food. When we cook food, we break down proteins, we break down starches, so that we can utilize them almost instantaneously. Whereas a chimpanzee, of course, he eats fruits, he only eats natural foods, and it takes him a long time to process all that food. But we as humans, of course, we digest food outside of our bodies. Cooking substantially increases the amount of energy that can be extracted from food. It denatures protein so that we can utilize it more readily. It gelatinizes starches so that it's almost instantaneously that we can utilize starch. It makes all food softer and easier to digest, thus requiring less energy. So if you want to lose weight, one of the ways you can do it is eat carrots or eat celery. Why? Because it takes us a long time to digest that food. So whatever you're getting out of the nutrients that you're getting out of that food, it lasts in your system for an extended amount of time. So one of the ways that we can lose weight is by eating foods that are harder to digest, like I was just about to say it, and it fled my mind. Roughage. We can eat roughage, and that'll slow down the process. It also cleans out our digestive system. Roughage, grains.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, stuff that's hard. Well, carrots and celery, raw vegetables. If you want to digest your vegetables fast, just cook them. And the more you cook them, the faster they go through your system. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So as humans, we have to cook our food in order to make it more edible. What am I talking about edible? I'm talking about trying to break it down into sugars and proteins that we need to utilize. Because of cooking, humans are able to consume foods that cannot be eaten raw. This reduced the amount of chewing necessary to consume food, reducing the amount of muscle required in the human jaw. So if we look at humans when they were only eating raw food, they had a sagittal ridge. They had a ridge on the top of their heads. And the jaw muscles were attached to that. Those hominids, those human structures, used to eat nuts. They used to break nuts with their teeth. And of course their teeth are shaped differently than modern man's teeth are. We could really never attack someone with our teeth because that's not what our teeth are made for. We can bite something, we can try to bite off a chunk of something, but if you look at the teeth of a chimpanzee or an ape, their teeth are much sharper than ours are. So they can do a lot more damage with their mouth than we can as humans. Okay, so what are we doing? We're reducing the amount of muscle mass in our jaw. It also changed the shape of our teeth, of course, and we have smashing teeth rather than biting teeth that bite off chunks of meat. We really don't have those. They're kind of in the front, they're kind of sharp, but not really that sharp. We don't have teeth, canines, distended canines, those sharp teeth that dogs have, that cats have. The reason they have those teeth is so that they can grab something and hold on to it. So if you've ever watched a cat kill a mouse or whatever, or a dog grab something like a rabbit, they will bite with those teeth, and those teeth are sharp, and they will grab a hold of the rabbit or the mouse or whatever. But we don't have those teeth. I used to have those teeth once upon a time. I had distended canines, but they weren't very sharp. It's not like I could bite somebody like a vampire or something like that. It just didn't work that way. But I had distended canines. I looked like a vampire. The average human, my dentist in Montana took care of them. He shaved them off so that I didn't look like a vampire anymore. The average human spends 1 hour chewing their food a day. The average chimpanzee spends 6 hours chewing their food every day. By cooking our food, we are able to evolve a much smaller digestive system that freed up much of the energy to be used by our brains. So we don't spend as much time eating as chimpanzees do. They eat all day long, and they chew. They're chewing all the time. We have to remind our children to chew, 28 times or whatever it is, 30 times. You have to remind them to not swallow their food whole, or, and of course, as humans, we don't really chew very much at all. Many primates eat a lot of fruit. We eat a lot of fruit, chimpanzees eat a lot of fruit, apes eat a lot of fruit, orangutans. They're always looking for fruit. And the reason is because fruit is a really good source of nutrients. It's rich in vitamins, it has lots of carbohydrates, has lots of calories in it. They tend to be available in concentrated patches. So if we're looking for fruit, we're talking about trees. We're talking about apple trees, we're talking about pear trees, plum trees, pawpaws. We're looking for big clumps of fruit. This gets really interesting. To live off of a diet of fruit, you need to keep in mind where the various fruit trees are located and when they would be likely to bear fruit. We have an orchard back in Iowa, and just before I came down here at the beginning of August, the Macintosh apples were ripe. So I have a bunch of Macintosh apples in my car, or in my refrigerator. I brought down a couple dozen of them. Macintosh are really sweet apples. Right now, the Red Delicious are ripe. And next will be the Granny Smith. We have a Granny Smith tree as well. So actually, if you ate apples on our farm, you could eat McIntosh apples at the beginning of August, you could eat Red Delicious at the end of August, and you could eat Granny Smith at the beginning of September. That's 2 whole months that we take it up with apples. If you like apples, if you don't like apples, you're SOL, I guess. Then there's something wrong with you, obviously there's something wrong with you. But of course, we can't eat all those apples. We have 2 huge apple trees. One's a Red Delicious and the other is a Granny Smith. And we can't eat all those apples at one time. So how in the world, what do we do with all those apples? Just let them rot? We could
Dry them
can
out.
them. Canning's a good way to take care of it.
You make them like prunes,
We dry them?
Yeah.
It's too many, way too many.
Make a
But
lot.
that's a good idea, that's not a bad idea.
Make a lot of pies.
There you go, we do make a lot of pies and we freeze them, that's one way to do it. What we do is we take them and we make apple cider out of it. Concentrating the essence of the apples. So we make apple cider out of it. The last time we did it, last year we didn't get a crop at all because the bugs got them. But the year before we got 31 gallons of apple cider out of our Red Delicious and our Granny Smith. So yeah, there are ways to preserve them. We make apple pies, but we don't dry anything. I don't know, we never even thought about that. But we make apple cider is what we do. Perhaps the greater need for a good memory and a big brain was triggered by the need to remember fruit locations. And of course, my mother used to talk about they would go back in the woods and there was a pawpaw tree back there. And they would pick pawpaws. I don't know if you've ever tasted pawpaws. They taste like rotten bananas. But they used to eat them like they were edible, I guess. But in the old days, of course, and here, of course, you guys had huge orchards all around the Dene Reservation, especially down in Canyon de Chelly, I guess. And of course, when Kit Carson came through, it's one of the tragedies of the federal government. They cut down all your apple trees or burned them or something.
There's a lot of peach trees. We have a peach tree.
In Canyon de Chelly?
No, in Tanoia, Paituba.
Oh.
We get a lot of peaches from it.
Go. What's better than peaches? I'm going to have a peach for lunch. I have a peach and a nectarine for lunch and 2 apples. I'm a fruit eater, but only until the season is over with. Then I'll have to go and.
A fruit eater that doesn't drink water.
That does not. I hate water. I drink lemonade. There you go. More fruit. I hate water. Those primates that had better skills at remembering where their fruit was would have been more likely to eat well and have surviving offspring than those who were stumbling about aimlessly looking for fruit trees. Trying to find that pawpaw tree, I can't remember where it was. Where in the world where's that pawpaw tree we ate out of last year? It's over there, isn't it? Oh, wait a minute, that's a desert. It can't be over there. No, it's the brilliant guy going, I know where it is. It's right behind the oak tree. So we'll just go over to the oak tree and we'll find the pawpaw tree. He's the one that was able to feed his family well. The number of primate species rely on food sources that require a fair bit of ingenuity to access them. Some primates' food sources include nuts and seeds encased in hard shells, so they have to break the shells. They need equipment to do that, either that or really, really strong teeth. They need to dig up tubers. Tubers usually have starch, like potatoes. A potato is a tuber. Chimpanzees will fish termites out of termite mounds. And termites have a lot of protein in them. And so that feeds them very well. Extracted food sources, such as the ones just mentioned, are often worth pursuing because they are rich in protein and certainly rich in energy. You need walnut trees. What was I reading? This guy planted, he was an abolitionist in the early part of when the United States was still controlled by England. And he had to leave because he was an abolitionist and he was telling the people that owned slaves that they shouldn't own slaves. So he had to leave the town. He had to go out of town. And he planted peach trees, pear trees, apple trees and walnut trees. And he planted walnut trees for the nuts, of course, but he planted the others for the fruits. So here he was creating his own orchard. And this is one of the reasons why, if you wander around the United States, farmers from England and whatnot, or wherever they were, Germany, or wherever they were from, if you go into their yards, they have a lot of fruit trees. They also have a lot of nut trees in their yard. And they would, of course, harvest the nuts and harvest the fruit. Those primates who were able to extract nutritious foods were more likely to survive and produce viable offspring. Most primates live in complex social groups, maintaining clear power hierarchies, allowing them to form various relationships and alliances. Conflicts, as well as cooperation, nepotism, and reciprocity, are relatively common, and of course we see that here as well. I noticed that on the Fort Belknap Reservation, lots of nepotism and reciprocity taking place. Lots of individuals getting jobs who don't qualify for those jobs. And the people who do qualify for the jobs, they're from the wrong family, so they can't get the job, as sad as that may seem. And that's nepotism, but that's okay.
It's like that everywhere. I know it didn't, or the hospital in Tuba's like that. And they say it's not what you know, it's who you know.
It's who you know, exactly.
All tribes are
Sure.
How about the Pima, are they like that, nepotism?
I'm sure, I'm not sure.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You see it just about on every reservation. Doesn't happen on the Blackfeet Reservation, I'm sure. No.
We don't do that.
Certainly doesn't happen here on this reservation. Or this college. Yeah, this college.
This college does not believe in
The nepotism. So let's pretend it doesn't exist. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist. That's great. Now, strangely enough, I've run into this over and over and over and over and over again because my family lives in Indiana. Well, I've never been stationed in Indiana. And wherever my wife was stationed, I had to find a job. And so I had to go out on the economy to try to find a job. And it's been tough. It's really been tough. Because down in Mississippi, I couldn't get a job in the hospital because, well, for one thing, they couldn't understand a word that I was saying. Because they talk with such a strong Southern accent. So they wouldn't hire a Yankee to work in the hospital. But I was able to get a job at the college. And as it turns out, there were 3 other Hoosiers working in my department when I was teaching at Mississippi University for Women. So it was difficult for me. And I've seen this every place that I've been. One of the reasons that I lost my job at Fort Belknap had to do with conflict with a select family. And I got crossways with that family. And eventually they got rid of me. They were able to get rid of me, which is kind of fun if you think about it. Oh well, I would still be up there if it wasn't for getting crossways with that family. But that's it.
Did they 86 you from the nuts?
Did they 86 me from there? They fired me, so yeah, I guess so. I went to the tribal council to try to get my job back. And there was too many politics being played, and I couldn't get my job back. That's okay. I'm here now, and I'm happier, right? You've got to be happy wherever you are. That's the truth. That's it. Humphrey and Dunbar have hypothesized that it was the necessity to navigate through the intricate and elaborate webs of social relationships. The need to attract a mate, of course, has something to do with that. Secure resources and protect themselves and their offspring. And this is the reason why our brains are so big. Because social interaction is tough. You have to understand the environment that you're in. You need to attract a mate. Who are you going to attract a mate? How are you going to do this? You need to not embarrass yourself. You need to not insult the wrong people. You need to secure resources. You need to eat, so you need to be somewhere at that table. You need to protect yourself, and you need to protect your offspring. Otherwise, your offspring will not survive. And this is one of the things that we think about when we think about our children. Will my child be popular? This is really important in the United States. In this society, it's important for your child to be popular. You don't want your child to be rejected. Because if they're rejected, for one thing, they're not going to want to go to school. You don't want your child to be bullied. You want to protect them, but how do you do that? You need to teach them how to interact when they're at school so that they are not rejected by everybody. And this is a worry for me. My grandson is 5 years old, and he's just starting kindergarten. Will he have any friends?
Yes.
He
Yeah.
will. He's
Everybody's best friends in kindergarten.
he's pretty affable. As fun.
I have a question.
Sure.
In your last class that I took with you, I think it was health psychology or something. But anyway, you were saying that the long-term effects from meth, there's a lot of mental disorders that come out of it. Will we, because there's so much meth that's going around, will we have a mental culture?
It's possible. I have detected that it's possible that we have a marijuana culture right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. People that smoke pot can't remember from 10 minutes ago. So if you're smoking pot while you're watching a movie, if it's one of those intricate movies where you have to remember what happened at the beginning of the movie, you're not going to remember it. So the movies all of a sudden, they're simple. They're like cut into 5-minute episodes. There's a lot of action, a lot of shooting, and a lot of loud noises. But you don't have to remember what was going on in the beginning of the movie. And I think it's because they're being written, for one thing, they're being written by guys that are smoking pot. But also, if they make it too intricate, people aren't going to want to watch it. So yeah, I think this will change things. This may become more like Idiocracy than if you've ever seen the movie. One of my favorite movies, Idiocracy, where they go back into the future and everybody's stupid because the wrong people have been reproducing and the smart people haven't been, and the dumb people have been producing tons and tons of babies.
It's crazy.
Okay, yeah, anyway. I think we may be headed in that direction. It's a possibility. Maybe
That's
I'm
scary.
being negative, yeah. But I mean, if you've ever been around meth people that are meth heads, they're dumb for like 18 months after they stop. And of course, marijuana just makes you stupid on a continual basis.
Wasn't it?
If you keep smoking.
I don't know what that was now. I did a paper on it. Or something. There's going to be a lot of people with schizophrenic mental disorders because the meth has the same chemical in it as is it LSD?
When you're on
or
crystal meth,
something?
it's like having a schizophrenic episode. So the more you do it, the more likely that it becomes.
Yeah. So in
Permanent
the
to
future,
some
there's going to be a lot of people,
Right.
with those mental disorders, especially schizophrenia.
Right. And one thing that we've noticed is that people that smoke pot, it can kick you into schizophrenia. Not only if you have the proclivity for schizophrenia, of course, but it's going to kick you into schizophrenia. So if you never smoke pot, then maybe you won't be kicked into schizophrenia. But if everybody's smoking pot, then everybody who has that proclivity will develop schizophrenia much more readily, much more rapidly. This is really kind of scary. It's one of those things that's really hard to talk about because the potheads are going, dude, be mellow, stop being negative, man, come on. And you look at those websites, they want to legalize marijuana, and that's all you read.
I'm not too worried about marijuana. I'm worried about meth.
Well, meth is a serious problem, but the thing about meth, and we've seen this with speed. Speed freaks back in the 1970s and 1980s, they killed themselves off. They died out. They didn't survive. They accelerated their lives and they died. Cocaine was the same way.
It's weird though, you're starting to see a lot of people walking around with their faces like all sunken and teeth all gone and and they're trying to clean themselves up
Right.
and they're beyond the 18 months of
Right.
and so what I'm saying and asking is I think, and I'm not too sure, but I think we're gonna have a culture of a mental culture
Sure.
caused from meth.
Right.
And especially where me and Michelle are from.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, it's bad up there.
I mean.
And we know where it was coming from.
there's
was
like
coming from Fort Peck.
20%, probably 20%, both of our residents that are gonna be, that don't have any effect from it, but, I mean, us as individuals, you know, it's just gonna be scary. It's gonna be like walking in a zombie land.
Well, if talk to your dad about this, because when I first got there in 2001, it was horrible. Fort Belknap was horrible.
It's not just there, it's everywhere. Like in Tuba, you can't even go out at night because, you know, there's people robbing. The stores there have been robbed a couple of times. The bank has been robbed twice. And like you can't even really go out once it's dark because that's when they all come out. And there's people having their houses broken into.
Well, Pinyon was like that, I guess.
Everywhere is like that, I think.
I just feel like maybe I'm secluded up here in Saline because I feel like nobody here in Saline does it. Like
I felt safe here when I came here, and I'm like, I'm gonna go for a walk and go by myself.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, we've had our rave here, but it's just diminished, you know, and I feel very safe here. I feel like nobody even heard of the drill.
Well, there's a lot of security here because of the college, and the security protects.
Yeah, and everything's fenced in.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Meth culture, yeah, but it's not the same way everywhere. So, like in Iowa, you know, there's not that much crystal meth in Iowa. So, are we going to have a meth culture? Well, what may be happening is the natives are destroying themselves with crystal meth.
And it's sad.
Yeah, it's really sad. But we know where it comes from. We know that it was coming, they were cooking meth on Fort Peck. And just before I left, they busted everybody on Fort Peck and Fort Belknap. There were people that were...
Even in LG Lodge Grounds, I guess there was a house and like 4 of them just shot each other up. It was like a meth house or something.
It makes us really stupid and somewhat violent. So yeah, I can understand them shooting themselves up with a gun, not with, okay, they were shooting each other. Dunbar had analyzed the relationship between neocortex ratio and average group size and estimated that the average size of the human ancestral population was 147.8. Okay, and this becomes a really interesting number because we're going to see how many other structures occur in 100 at the 150 range. Looking at subsistence societies still in existence, Dunbar discovered that the average clan size was about 148.4. So we're getting the same number over and over again. They looked at ancestrally 147. They looked at the subsistence societies 148. It gets better. It gets better. In 2011, Facebook did a survey of its accounts and found that the average number of friends that people had was between 120 and 130. And that's about how many friends I have on Facebook, 120 to 130. The same year, Twitter analyzed their accounts and discovered that people could maintain between 100 and 200 interactions. So we're seeing the same number over and over again, somewhere close to 150, over and over and over again. Any groups that are larger than 150 become too unwieldy to manage without some institutional structure, yet smaller groups lose their advantages of larger groups. So if the group is too small, then nothing happens with it. But if it's about 150 people, then you're more likely to get something done, as confusing as that is. Although primates are highly social mammals, in many ways, humans can be said to be an ultra-social species. Humans tend to be far more engaged with others around them than they do than other primates are involved with people. We are involved with everybody around us. We gossip all the time. What do? We're constantly attending to what other people are doing. We ask them, what are you doing? You know, call somebody up on the telephone. What are you doing? You know, what's going on? We gossip about other people a lot. Our behaviors are guided a great deal by what others around us are doing. So if somebody else is doing something, we do it too. We imitate them, we emulate them. Usually we imitate them. So, and it's really kind of interesting. In psychology, we know that if I do something, if Brandon and I are talking to each other, and I start scratching my ear, Brandon will do it too. There you go. See? Exactly. Yeah. So if we're having a conversation and I'm bouncing my foot up and down, or he's bouncing his foot up and down, then I will start bouncing my foot up and down. I can't help it. I'm imitating his behavior. We are in sync with one another, as confusing as that is. So when you're talking to somebody, a lot of times, and you can play games with the other person you're talking to by, scratching your head or picking your nose or whatever. I mean, you can play all kinds of interesting games. But we do that. We imitate each other. We emulate each other. It shows that I'm not only listening to you, but I am in sync with you by me doing exactly what you're doing, by you doing exactly what I'm doing. Fascinating stuff. In an experiment by Dean et al. In 2012, the researchers compared the ability of a chimpanzee and orangutan versus a 2.5-year-old child. What they did, they tested them with a physical problem and they tested them with a social problem. The child and the great apes performed equally well on the physical problem at about 75%. Okay, so we're even with the great apes as far as the physical problem is concerned. 2.5-year-old child, chimpanzee, and orangutan. So orangutans and chimpanzees have a mental capacity of about a 2.5-year-old, which is kind of interesting. I'm sorry about the picture. It's Planet of the Apes. Okay, that's Charlton Heston. However, for social problems, when the subjects had to follow a model, the 2.5-year-old was more likely to follow precisely what the model did, because we are humans. We imitate. We don't emulate, we imitate. The great apes tried to solve the social problem through emulation. They emulated the process, and it was an abysmal failure. We imitate. Therefore, we do exactly what the other person does, and we take in the context of what's going on so that we can use that later. So the child imitated, and the great apes emulated. Most of the humans scored 100% on the social problem, while most of the apes scored 0. They emulated, we imitated. We can take that piece of information and we can use it someplace else. If I learn to jump playing basketball, I can also jump when I play volleyball. I'm imitating. But an ape, if he learns to do something, if he emulates, he can only do it in that context. He can't generalize it to another context. But because we're human, we can imitate. So no matter how reclusive an individual or a group of humans are, culture and the biology of human brain are bound inextricably. Humans evolved to be a cultural species. We follow one another. We imitate one another. And that's one of the reasons why I can give you information and you can take it, you can imitate what I have just told you, you can take that information and you can use it in other contexts. You can take the things that I'm saying about the 150 and you can tell me about your own experiences. You can take that piece of information and you can use it in another context. If you were apes or you were chimpanzees or whatever, one of the great apes, you couldn't do that. So that's how we learn culture. I know, we're at the end of the chapter. I'm so excited too. I know. I love this picture. It's people painted blue. Everybody's painted blue. If you think about it, if you've ever played on a sports team, everybody wears the same clothes. They imitate each other. Somebody decides what they're going to wear, and everybody wears the same clothes. We imitate. Or at a ceremony, no, I'm sorry. At a ceremony, we all paint ourselves blue, which is exciting. And that happened in the color run. Everybody's running through the paint and getting the same color on them. Okay. Which is exciting. Okay. But we are done with that chapter. So I'm supposed to be on chapter 2. I finished it. This is the second week I'm done with chapter 2. I know you're as excited as I am. Let's start chapter 3. How much time do we have? 10 minutes? We can do it. Let's start. This is a really fascinating chapter. I love this chapter. The next chapter. this was a good chapter. I really enjoyed the imitating and emulating thing. And think about all that stuff. And 150, what an important number that is. Does anybody have more than 150 Facebook friends? Do you have more than 150? Do you interact with all 3,426?
I have a lot of cousins back home, so like, yeah.
Do you have more than 150?
I have like about 500 and something.
And you interact with all of them?
Yeah.
A lot.
And then I have to keep my Facebook page PG because I work with residence life, so, you know, I'm gonna have a lot of students.
Of course. Not that you wouldn't make your Facebook page PG anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Acme.
I'll bet that if you counted the number of people that you interact with, it's not more than 150. You've got 350 people that sometimes communicate with you, and you sometimes communicate with them, but you don't have more than 150 people that you interact like you're.
Well, I wanted to clean out my friends list, you know, and I was thinking about it, and then, so I start going through, and I was like, well, I talk to them, I talk to them,
There's a lot of fake profiles. It's kind of scary. Like there's like over 300 people following me, and I look through them and I don't even know them, and some of them you have to like block
So there's only 150 people you probably know.
closely, I would say. And then there's a lot, you know, where you
Sure.
know them, but you're not like really.
Good friends with them.
Yeah,
You
it's
don't-
just hi and bye.
yeah, hi and bye, exactly. I talked to my grandson the other day. He said, hi, bye. On the phone. Who does that? Well, my grandson did. He had something to do, and I wasn't very important to him. Our anthropological past. Let's look at our anthropological past. Different environments affect the ways that people go about living their lives. If you think about it, it's different if you were living in Montana, cold as beyond anything you can imagine. It's really cold up there in the wintertime. It's not so cold here. It snows here and people are going, oh my God.
It's freezing.
Well, it's not that cold here. It's not that cold here. I don't even turn my heater on half the time. I don't know. What's wrong with me? I lived in Montana where it's minus 30 up all the time.
I don't think I could survive if I went back home for the winter.
Probably not.
I'd probably flip over.
Yeah. And people freeze to death up there. Well, people freeze to death here, strangely enough. And when it's not even freezing outside, they still freeze to death. Some of the ways that physical environments affect culture are quite direct. If you live in the desert, you live one way. If you live in Iowa, where I'm from, well, not where I'm from, where I live right now, but it's so green and everything grows. And if you don't mow it, it gets covered with grass and all kinds of weeds and horrible stuff. But here, I came back and nobody mowed my yard, and it was overgrown. But I mean, it was only this tall. It wasn't very tall, and it was all weeds. There's no grass. But up in Iowa, it would have turned into a jungle. As funny as that is. There are no large indigenous mammals on the Hawaiian Islands. Therefore, the Hawaiians do not have hunting traditions. If we look at the different groups of indigenous people around the United States, we had buffalo hunters, we had people living east of the Mississippi River, and there were buffalo herds over there, but they weren't nearly as large as they are over here. So those individuals, they ate a lot of turkey, they ate a lot of deer, they lived in the hardwood forests, they developed a different lifestyle than the people on the plains. The Indians that lived in teepees. If we can just look at the type of housing that they utilized. They used, I can't even remember what they called them. They weren't wickiups. Wickiups are over here. They had buffalo hide teepees up on the northern plains, up on the Great Plains. They utilized teepees. The Mandan actually built permanent structures that were relatively extensive. Farther east, they had these huge buildings where everybody lived. They lived in a communal structure. They didn't have individual houses.
Was it like a longhouse?
It was a longhouse. That's exactly right. This was a longhouse. So you can look at the different housing structures that they utilized, and you can see that everybody was different. It all depended on where you were. If you had bark, you used bark. If you didn't have any trees, you certainly couldn't build log cabins.
What about the Anasazis? Have you seen their structures?
Yeah.
Their little houses
Yeah.
and everything? And you were saying archaeologists or whatever.
Right.
They studied the culture back then and everything. Well, where did they go? That's one of the questions. Like,
Well, we can ask two people where they went. Well, we can ask Chris, and he's going to say, well, they became the Pima. If we ask Brandon, he's going to say they became the Dene. I had this conversation yesterday with one of our history teachers.
Really?
Yeah, because once upon a time, the Dene didn't claim the Anasazi as their ancestors. But all the Pueblos, all the Pueblo groups did claim the Anasazi. And if you think about it, have the Dene ever lived in structures like that? I mean, beyond the Anasazi, unless the Anasazi are your ancestors, what did your structures look like? They looked like, were they hogans? Is that what you were living in? You were living in?
Actually, back where I'm from, way back towards Grand Canyon, but
Right.
a little further towards us, where there's no trees or anything. We didn't have anything to hold them better. So what they used out there was rocks, or the side of hills,
Right.
rock structures, the best way to think of
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the question, and that's an excellent question. Uh-oh. Is he telling you where they actually lived? Oh, okay. I was worried. So the question is, who are these guys and what happened to them? And the answer is probably, well, they decided to stop doing that and they started moving into other areas. Maybe a disease came through and I don't know. Who knows what happened to them? But they built some amazing structures if you think about it. And if you look at the pueblos that do exist, Laguna, San Juan, Taos, those structures are very similar to the Anasazi.
you know what? 3 years ago, one of the trees by the creek, it came up from the erosion, and they found an old body structure there, and so they called the national park or whoever.
Right.
But anyway, they were looking at it and they were saying it was an Anasazi, and it's like a bone structure.
Okay.
It was really small.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you could talk about things being really small because the Blackfeet are tall people. You guys are big. Yes, you are. Don't pretend.
They are.
Sure they are. And the Nakota and the Grove are relatively tall people too.
Well, look at the Navajo today,
They are. They're much bigger than they
They're
used to be.
really tall.
Yeah.
I mean, my son is like 6 foot.
Is that really tall? 6 foot really tall? Oh, come on. Your guards are 6'4" up in Browning. Yes, they are. They're huge. You come from a huge population. They're really, really big people. I know, because I'm only 5'7". 6. Okay, I'm 5'6".
And my sister.
I was shorter than even the women up there. It was so embarrassing.
Did they just manhandle you?
Oh yeah, no, everything.
Come here, Bruce.
Yeah, exactly.
By the neck.
The old women, they're kind of bent over a little bit. They're still taller than I am. It's just not right. I know. Come from a short population. The Kung and the Kalahari live in an environment surrounded by large animals and derive much of their caloric intake from hunting them. The Kung, of course, have a strong hunting tradition. In Hawaii, they don't have a strong hunting tradition. Maybe they hunted whales, but probably not. They found enough sustenance in the fish and in all the smaller animals that they could hunt. So they never hunted any big animals.
But
So
you
they
said
don't have a
had,
hunting tradition.
They had deers on the island?
No.
What was their biggest animal?
A goose. The nene. It's the Hawaiian goose. So what did they eat? Well, they ate a lot of fish, of course. But they were little fish, and it was easy to catch them. And we're going to talk about other groups that had exactly the same problem. This is time to go. Okay, why don't we stop right now, or we'll stop right here. I don't think that clock is right. Does anybody else want to?
11:54.
Okay, I apologize for keeping you over.
11:54.
Okay, I apologize, I'm sorry. So I'll see you next week. Have a great Labor Day weekend. I certainly need some extra time off, so.
And you send it off past the 7th?
Yeah,